Hi, I'm back with you with another video of our Columbia School of Linguistics channel. Today I want to talk to you about the so-called impersonal constructions as a following instruction on my video on Spanish sé. One of the uses of sé, as you know, is the so-called impersonal construction, and this has led to thinking that in many cases, in many languages and also in Spanish, there are different ways to express impersonality. But I would rather say that what we should do is observe the forms that we see in the different languages, and as a result of that, see what functions each of the forms have. So that is what we're going to try to do. So I'm not only going to talk about impersonal sé, but I'm also going to talk about other constructions that may be observed in Spanish that may provide an impersonal message. So what we will see in my next slide is there seem to be many ways to be impersonal in many languages, and it's kind of a joke, 50 ways to leave your lover, in this case 50 ways to be impersonal. So the problem is that I'm going to discuss in this video is what are the differences of meanings in the different forms that Spanish uses to with which a certain degree of impersonality can be expressed. The hypotheses I will be working with are the following. The hypothesis for impersonal sé is that the acting entity is irrelevant. You have seen this already in one of my other videos, the one on sé in general, and one of the interpretations of sé is the so-called impersonal reading, and the hypothesis is that the acting entity is indeed irrelevant. Now, another construction that is, well, maybe not always called impersonal, but passive, and I think impersonal and passive are kind of a continuum of taking away the responsibility for the actually acting entity. So, ser plus past participle indicates, as the form shows, the presence, a certain presence of the acting entity in periphery, because the actually acting entity can appear in a prepositional phrase by means of por. The next hypothesis is the hypothesis for the impersonal interpretation of tu, the second person singular. This impersonal interpretation means, according, at least that is my hypothesis, that the acting entity is one like you, the interlocutor. Another frequently used impersonal message may be expressed by the pronoun uno, meaning one, not unfamiliar in English. Uno in Spanish means, at least that is my hypothesis, that the acting entity is one like me, the speaker. And the last one I will be discussing in this short video is the third person plural. The acting entity is, at least that is my hypothesis, is the people that surround us. And please be aware that these impersonal constructions with a third person plural never have an explicit subject. So it's only those uses that I'm referring to now. Now let's take a look one by one, and I will be illustrating my hypothesis by small contexts taken from a book by Gabriel García Márquez called Los funerales de la mamá grande. First of all, before starting explaining or illustrating the different hypotheses that I've just presented, I would like to stress the following. When we are talking about focus in Columbia School theory, focus is expressed by the verb ending. You have to be aware that focus is a perspective deliberately chosen by the speaker, or writer in our case, So this only indicates this perspective that is taken from by the speaker on the narrated reality. Focus in Columbia School does not mean emphasis, which may be interpreted as such in everyday speech. Now, deixis is a kind of a pathfinder. As you may know in one of the other videos that I present, deixis is the force with which certain forms direct or point at a certain referent. And deixis is a phenomenon that is used in morphology, and since verb ending is also morphology, deixis is a pathfinder. Deixis is an instruction to the hearer to find the referent. So focus is a perspective, not particularly emphasis. Deixis is a pathfinder, and also not necessarily emphasis. With this in mind, we are going to try to attack this problem. Let us pass on to the first hypothesis, that impersonal se indicates that the entity in focus, if there is one, is not the agent. And I'm kind of balancing between what traditionally is called passive se and impersonal se. Now, we know that the form se has low deixis. That means that there is hardly any instruction to find the correct referent, and that may have two reasons, as I will briefly recall. Either the agent is super obvious, but in this case, in the impersonal readings, the agent is irrelevant. Now, why would a speaker use impersonal se? And my hypothesis is to elude responsibility for action. Now, let me just give an example taken from En este pueblo no hay ladrones. In this village there are no thieves. This is a very interesting story in which the narrator tells about the robbery of 3 billiard balls in a bar, and this goes all wrong, and etc. etc. And this is a fragment where the thief is asking money for his for his life, just to go out and have a drink, because apparently the balls that he stole cannot be sold, so he doesn't have any money. So he asks to his wife, ¿Tienes plata? Do you have money? Preguntó el sábado a su mujer. 11 pesos, respondió ella, y agregó suavemente, es la plata del cuarto. So she says she has 11 pesos, but that it's the money for the rent of the room. Te propongo un negocio. I propose a business. ¿Qué? Préstamelos. Why don't you borrow them to me? Hay que pagar el cuarto. The room needs to be paid. And then he says, se paga después. It will be paid later. And of course, here, the person that is supposedly going to pay, either his wife or himself, he wants the money to go out, and he just avoids all responsibility of the actual paying of the rent. Se paga después. No referent is looked for. So this is in my view, a good example of the use of impersonal se to avoid any responsibility of, in this case, paying the rent. Let's go to the next example, an example with ser and past participle, the so-called traditional passive construction. As I said, the hypothesis for this one is the entity in focus is the patient, not the actual agent in reality. But the agent is likely to be present in the periphery by means of a prepositional phrase por the agent by X. Now, why would a speaker use this construction? In my view, the communicative goal is to highlight the perspective of the patient. Remember that I said that the entity in focus, which means the entity that is represented in the verb ending, in this case is the patient. So the communicative goal is to highlight to choose the perspective of the patient in the situation and not the agent. Let's take a look at an example. We're again at the same short story, En este pueblo no hay ladrones, and the situation in the bar is described here after the robbery of the balls. El salón se abrió el lunes y fue invadido por una clientela exaltada. The bar, the saloon, if you want, opened next Monday and was invaded by an excited group of clients. Now, this is very interesting because obviously our perspective is the state of the saloon where people can play snooker and or billiards, and but there's no reason to be there anymore. So obviously, the focus, the perspective that is chosen is the saloon. Now, logically, it is not the clients that interest us, but the saloon, and that is why it's being presented as the focus of fue invadido. It was invaded by the excited clients. La mesa de billar había sido cubierta con un paño morado que le imprimió al establecimiento un carácter funerario. The billiard table had been covered with a cloth, a purple cloth that gave the saloon a kind of a funerary air. So again, we see another passive construction with ser había sido cubierta, and obviously it was the boss of the saloon that had covered it, but he is not irrelevant. What is being showed here is the perspective from the saloon and the billiard that has become useless to the clients. Let's move on to the next one. I think this example is clear enough. The next one is impersonal tú. The entity in focus, was my hypothesis, is someone like the interlocutor. Now, a communicative goal of this impersonal use of tú is looking for empathy from the interlocutor, as if the interlocutor may be imagining the situation in which the speaker encounters him or herself. Here we have an interesting fragment from the short story Los funerales de la Mamá Grande, the funeral of Mamá Grande. Al amanecer, la Mamá Grande pidió que la dejaran a solas con Nicanor para impartir sus últimas instrucciones. Mamá Grande is about to die and she wants to leave her last instructions to Nicanor. Durante media hora, con perfecto dominio de sus facultades, se informó de la marcha de los negocios. So she was still very bright, and she was informed of her business. Hizo formulaciones especiales sobre el destino de su cadáver y se ocupó, por último, de las velaciones. So she made special instructions for the destiny of her body, and she gave the last instruction of the wake. Tienes que estar con los ojos abiertos, dijo. You have to keep your eyes open, she said. And this is a fragment that is relevant. So tienes has the second person singular verb ending and is supposedly directed to an interlocutor who, and of course she can't be referring to herself because she will be dead by then. So she's basically saying, you have to be in my place and be with your eyes open. Guarda bajo llave, and there comes the final instruction, guarda bajo llave todas las cosas de valor, pues mucha gente no viene a los velorios sino a robar. So you have to hide everything with locks, because most people don't come to for other reasons than to rob. So here we see that she's not actually speaking directly to Nicanor. She's kind of inviting him to imagine the situation and to act in her place during her wake. The next short fragment I want to share with you is the illustration of uno, and according to my hypothesis, the entity in focus is a third person, someone like the speaker. And this uno literally means one, and in English this use is also very, very common. You should look the Netflix series The Crown, where the Queen in many cases expresses herself using the one construction, by which she means basically me, myself, but wants to present it in a more impersonal way. So the communicative goal is to show compromise, to say, well, it's basically me, but to avoid responsibility and to lay the responsibility somewhere else, as if it doesn't pertain to you. In this fragment, we see a very clear case of use of uno. Again, we are in the story, in this village there are no thieves, en este pueblo no hay ladrones, and Damaso, the thief of the billiard balls, is narrating how he felt when he was in the saloon to rob the billiard balls. En ninguna parte, says his girlfriend, hay tantas cosas como en el salón de billar. In nowhere you have so many things in a saloon of billiards. Así parece, dijo Damaso. Pero después, cuando uno está allá dentro, se pone a mirar las cosas y a registrar por todos lados y se da cuenta de que no hay nada que sirva. So it seems, says Damaso. But afterwards, when one is inside, and of course he's talking about his own experience, but he kind of wants to project his experience to a more general perspective. So if someone like me is there and looks around, then one sees that there is nothing that is really useful stealing. So indeed, he is saying, this is my experience, but he's kind of generalizing his experience, presenting it by using uno, one. The last one, before coming to some short conclusions I want to discuss with you, is the third person plural verb ending. And I always call this the gossip kind of impersonal construction, because it is generally used to spread out gossip overheard by other people. So the entity in focus is an unidentified surrounding group of third persons, and these third persons never exhibit pronouns. And the communicative goal is hearsay or an unidentified source. We have a nice example again from En este pueblo no hay ladrones, in which Ana, the wife of Damaso, who stole the billiard balls, says, tienes entrañas de burro. Basically, she says, you're as stupid as a donkey. Has debido tener en cuenta que yo estaba aquí sin poder dormir, creyendo que te traían muerto cada vez que había un ruido en la calle. You should have taken into account that I was here without being able to sleep, thinking that they would bring you dead. And this is the relevant part. Of course, they would bring you dead is the people in the village that surround them. Anytime I would hear some noise from the street. Y agregó con un suspiro, and she added with a sigh, y todo eso para salir con 3 bolas de billar. And all of this only to come out with 3 billiard balls. So, in fact, this is actually the people that surround them, the people, the anonymous people from the village. So what I wanted to show you in this short video is that Columbia School provides you of tools to resolve communicative message problems. So please try to apply these tools provided here on your examples and let us know if this works for you. So thank you for your attention, and maybe see you in another video of our channel. Bye.